Kenjiro Ishikawa commanded an empire built of steel, concrete, and fear. From his penthouse office that pierced the Tokyo skyline, he could manipulate markets, ruin rivals, and bend politicians to his will with a single, softly spoken command. His suits were tailored in Milan, his watches forged in Switzerland, and his cars were armored beasts that prowled the city streets like panthers. Every facet of his life was a testament to absolute control, a fortress of wealth designed to insulate him from the chaos of the world. He could buy anything, silence anyone, and solve any problem that could be quantified in yen. Yet, every evening, he returned to a sprawling mansion at the city's edge, a place of chilling, opulent silence, where he was confronted by the one failure his power could not remedy. His mother, Hannah, was a ghost in her own home. For a year, since his father's passing, she had been retreating, shrinking from the world until she was confined to her bed, her voice a forgotten memory. Kenjiro had summoned the world's finest doctors, specialists who spoke in hushed, expensive tones about grief-induced catatonia and psychosomatic paralysis. He had hired teams of nurses, efficient women in starched white uniforms who monitored vitals and administered nutrients, but who could not reach the woman lost inside. The vast, silk-sheeted bed was an island, and his mother was its sole, shipwrecked inhabitant. By her side, on a polished mahogany table, sat a crystal vase, always empty. It was a symbol of his futility, a constant, glittering reminder that he could not bring life back into this room. His efforts were transactional, cold, another problem to be solved with resources. When the latest high-priced nursing agency failed, his assistant, with a note of desperation, had suggested a smaller, more discreet service. They sent a girl. A foreigner. An American. Her name was Aisha. When she arrived, Kenjiro barely glanced at her, a slim figure in a simple blue dress, her presence a quiet ripple in the stagnant air of his home. He saw her not as a person, but as the final, desperate variable in a failing equation. He had built an empire to protect his family, yet he could not save its heart. And that is where this story truly begins. The Ishikawa mansion was less a home and more a museum of sorrow, and Aisha felt its cold weight the moment she stepped through the massive oak doors. The air was still and smelled faintly of polish and old money. Marble floors stretched out like frozen lakes, reflecting the cold light from cathedral-high windows. It was a world of profound, suffocating silence, a stark contrast to the vibrant, noisy neighborhood she had left behind. Her own life had been a series of fractures and repairs, a mosaic of hardship that had taught her to listen to what was not being said. She carried her own ghosts, a quiet collection of memories that had etched a permanent caution into her gaze and left a faint, silvery scar on her wrist that she often hid beneath the cuff of her sleeve. When she was led to Hannah's room, she was not intimidated by the luxury. She saw past the priceless antiques and the silk tapestries. She saw the woman in the bed. Hannah Ishikawa was a delicate, bird-like figure, lost in a sea of embroidered pillows, her eyes fixed on a point on the ceiling that only she could see. The nurses before Aisha had seen a medical chart, a patient. Aisha saw a soul adrift. She noticed the small things Kenjiro, in his impatient grief, had overlooked, the worn-out corner of a silk blanket where Hannah's fingers restlessly picked at the threads, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of cherry blossoms that clung to an old shawl draped over a chair, the way her gaze would occasionally drift to a faded photograph of a smiling man on the nightstand. Aisha didn't try to force a connection. She didn't use the falsely cheerful voice the other nurses had employed. Instead, she began to work, her movements a form of quiet communication. She dusted the furniture with a soft, rhythmic grace. She changed the water in the untouched glass, her motions fluid and gentle. She opened the heavy velvet curtains, not all at once, but slowly, allowing the morning light to creep into the room like a shy visitor. She was a calming presence, a steady, silent tide in a room that had been locked in a dead calm for far too long. She didn't try to fill the silence with words, but with life. Kenjiro's days were a maelstrom of calculated violence and high-stakes negotiation. He moved through his world with the lethal precision of a shark, his emotions locked away in a vault as impenetrable as the one in his office. He came home one afternoon far earlier than usual, a deal having collapsed under the sheer weight of his reputation before it had even begun. The house greeted him with its usual tomb-like quiet. An irritation prickled at him. He paid a fortune for this place to be staffed, for there to be a semblance of life, yet it remained a mausoleum. He loosened his tie, his footsteps echoing on the marble as he made his way towards his mother's wing, preparing himself for the daily report of failure. But as he drew closer, a sound reached him, faint at first, then clearer. It was a sound so alien in this house that he stopped dead in the hallway. It was music. Not from a stereo, but a voice. It was a low, soulful hum that blossomed into a soft, melodic song. It was a spiritual, a melody born of heartache and hope, a sound that spoke of humid southern nights and unwavering faith. It was a language his concrete empire did not understand. He moved silently, his training taking over, until he was at his mother's partially open door. He peered through the crack. The scene inside froze the breath in his lungs. The new maid, Aisha, was not cleaning. She was sitting in the chair beside the bed, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. And she was singing. She was singing to his mother. Her voice was not powerful or polished. It was something far more potent. It was honest. It was a balm. And his mother. Hannah's head was turned on the pillow. Her eyes, which for a year had been vacant, dull portals to an empty world, were fixed on Aisha's face. They were not just seeing, they were watching. There was a flicker in their depths, a spark of cognition, a ghost of a presence he had thought was lost forever. Kenjiro stood paralyzed, a man disarmed not by a weapon, but by a song. It was an act of simple, human grace, and in that moment, it was more powerful than his entire criminal syndicate. He pulled back from the door before he could be seen, retreating down the hall with a silence that belied the storm raging within him. He felt an unwelcome, chaotic surge of emotions, confusion, resentment, and a fragile, terrifying sliver of hope. Who was this girl? This outsider who had, in a matter of days, achieved what the world's most expensive specialists could not? His mind, accustomed to transactions and leverage, tried to categorize her actions. Was it a trick? A play for more money? But the memory of her song, the pure, unvarnished sincerity in it, dismantled his cynicism. It wasn't a performance for his benefit. He wasn't even supposed to be there. It was a genuine offering, a gift of solace from one wounded soul to another. The thought was deeply unsettling. It suggested a world that operated on principles beyond his control, a currency of empathy he did not possess and could not acquire. From that day on, Kenjiro began to watch her. He used the security cameras he'd had installed for protection to observe this quiet, unassuming girl. He saw her simple, consistent rituals. Each morning, she would go into the neglected garden and snip a single, perfect camellia, placing it in the crystal vase by his mother's bed. The vase had been empty for a year. He watched as she read aloud from old books of poetry she found on the shelves, her voice a soft murmur that filled the oppressive silence. She never demanded a response from Hannah, but she spoke to her as if she were a participant in the world, not just a spectator. One evening, watching the monitor in his study, he saw Aisha gently brushing his mother's long, graying hair. The gesture was so tender, so patient, it triggered a memory he had long suppressed. He was a small boy, sick with a fever, and his mother was sitting by his bed, humming a traditional Japanese lullaby as she stroked his forehead. The warmth of that memory, the feeling of unconditional love and safety, flooded him with an aching sense of loss. He had become a man who protected his mother's body, but he had completely forgotten how to care for her heart. Aisha was aware of the cameras. She felt the weight of Kenjiro's unseen gaze, a silent, brooding presence that followed her through the grand, empty rooms. Yet she was not afraid. She had faced down dangers far more visceral than the quiet surveillance of a powerful, broken man. She recognized his pain because it resonated with a muted version of her own, the kind that masquerades as strength, building walls so high you forget there's a world on the other side. She simply continued her work, her focus remaining squarely on Hannah. Her care was an act of quiet defiance against the despair that had claimed the house. One afternoon, while carefully cleaning a heavy, ornate bureau in Hannah's room, she found a small, lacquered box tucked away in the back of a drawer. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was a delicate music box, its wooden surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl cherry blossoms. She wound the key, but it only produced a choked, discordant clink. It was broken. But Aisha saw more than a broken toy. She saw a metaphor for the room, for the woman in the bed. She saw something that could, perhaps, be mended. From then on, she dedicated her short breaks to the small, intricate mechanism. She brought a tiny set of tools from her own room and would sit by the window, the afternoon sun illuminating the delicate gears and pins. Hannah began to watch her. At first, her glances were fleeting, but soon they became more sustained. It was the first voluntary action, the first sign of genuine curiosity Aisha had seen. The tiny music box became a silent project between them, a focal point in the vast emptiness. Aisha's grandfather had been a watchmaker, a man of few words who had taught her that the most complex problems could be solved with patience and a gentle, steady hand. He had shown her how to listen to the rhythm of a broken thing, to understand where the harmony was lost. As she worked on the music box, she felt his presence, a quiet reassurance from her past, a reminder that some things were worth the effort of mending, no matter how long it took. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The world outside the windows was a wash of gray, the rhythmic drumming of water against glass the only sound in the room. Aisha sat in her usual spot, the music box in her lap. With a final, delicate turn of a tiny screwdriver, she felt a faint click as a minuscule pin settled back into place. She held her breath and gently wound the small brass key. For a moment, there was only the soft whirring of the gears. Then a single clear note emerged. It was followed by another and another, until a fragile, tinny melody filled the room. It was hesitant, fragmented, like a memory struggling to surface, but it was unmistakably the tune of Sakura Sakura, a folk song every Japanese child knew. From the bed, there was a sharp intake of breath. Aisha looked over. Hannah's eyes were wide, fixed on the music box. Her hand, which had lain limp on the covers for a year, twitched. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she lifted it a few inches, her fingers trembling. A single, perfect tear welled in the corner of her eye and traced a silver path down her weathered cheek. Aisha felt a surge of triumph, but she suppressed it. This was a delicate, sacred moment. She didn't cheer or exclaim. She simply rose, walked to the bedside, and with a soft pat of her thumb, gently wiped the tear away. She placed the music box on the nightstand, where its faltering melody could continue to play. Later that night, Kenjiro returned home, weary from a day of threats and betrayals. As he passed his mother's room, he heard the faint, tinkling notes. He stopped, his blood running cold. He pushed the door open and saw the small box on the table, playing its broken tune. He recognized it instantly. It was the song his father used to hum while working in his garden. It was the melody of his parents' courtship, the soundtrack to his own childhood. The sound didn't just break the silence, it shattered his composure. All the grief he had meticulously buried under layers of rage, power, and control erupted. For the first time, he didn't see a problem to be solved. He saw his mother, a woman mourning her husband, just as he was mourning his father. And a wave of profound, suffocating shame washed over him for having been so blind for so long. The world Kenjiro had built to keep chaos at bay was violently breached on a moonless night. An attack, orchestrated by a rival Yakuza faction he had been systematically dismantling, was swift and brutal. Alarms blared, shattering the mansion's hard-won peace. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the marble halls. Kenjiro's training, the cold instincts of a leader, took over. His men moved with lethal efficiency, but his only thought was for his mother. He burst into her room, his face a grim mask. Aisha was already there, shielding Hannah's frail body with her own. "Get her to the safe room." "Now," he commanded, his voice a low growl. The chaos of the evacuation was terrifying. The flashing lights, the shouts, the percussive sounds of violence. It was a brutal sensory assault. In the cold, steel-reinforced panic room deep in the mansion's foundation, the immediate physical threat was gone, but a new crisis was unfolding. The terror had acted like a key, unlocking the trauma that had silenced Hannah in the first place. Kenjiro now understood, in a flash of horrifying clarity, that his father's death had not been peaceful. It had been violent, a consequence of his own life, a truth he had hidden from her and himself. His mother was now completely catatonic, her eyes wide with a terror that saw nothing in the present, only the horrors of the past. She was trembling uncontrollably. Kenjiro was frantic. He barked orders into his phone, summoning his personal doctor, shouting for sedatives. He was trying to control the situation, to throw money and power at it, his only known solutions. But they were useless. The doctor arrived, administered a shot, but it did nothing to quell the deep-seated terror. Kenjiro was utterly, devastatingly helpless. The fortress he had built had become a prison, and the very violence he wielded to protect his family had become the weapon that was destroying his mother all over again. He was back at the beginning, a powerful man reduced to a terrified boy, watching the person he loved most slip away into darkness. Defeat settled on Kenjiro like a physical weight. He slid down the cold steel wall of the safe room, his head in his hands. The sounds of his empire at war faded into a dull roar, meaningless noise in the face of his profound failure. His power, his wealth, his reputation, they were all worthless artifacts in this small, sterile room. He had failed, utterly. He looked up and saw Aisha.
She was not panicked.
Amidst the sterile fear, she was an island of calm. She paid him no mind, her attention focused solely on Hannah. She moved to the trembling woman and knelt before her, taking Hannah's icy, quivering hands into her own.
She didn't speak.
She didn't offer empty platitudes or reassurances. She simply held her hands, a firm, warm anchor in a sea of terror. And then she began to sing. It was the same song, the same quiet, soulful spiritual that had drifted down the hallway and cracked open his world weeks ago. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the tense silence. It was a melody of pure empathy, a prayer that asked for nothing but offered everything. It wrapped around Hannah's terror, not trying to extinguish it, but to hold it, to soothe it. Kenjiro watched, stripped of his pride, his anger, his control.
He was just a son.
The song worked its way into his own guarded heart, dismantling the final defenses. The shame and grief he had held at bay for a year finally broke through. A raw, guttural sob escaped his lips. He crawled across the floor, the master of Tokyo's underworld on his hands and knees, and knelt beside his mother, opposite Aisha. He reached out and took his mother's other hand. It was cold as marble. He looked into her terrified, unseeing eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Okae-san, I'm so sorry. I miss him too." It was more than an apology. It was a confession. It was an admission of shared pain, the first honest words he had spoken to her in a year. A flicker of something in Hannah's eyes. Her trembling lessened. Her fingers, fragile as twigs, tightened around Aisha's hand. Then, slowly, agonizingly, she turned her head, and her eyes, for the first time, met his. In the aftermath of the attack, a new kind of silence settled over the Ishikawa mansion. The threat from the rival clan was brutally and permanently neutralized, a stark reminder of Kenjiro's capacity for violence. But inside the house, the emotional landscape had been irrevocably altered. The oppressive, empty silence of grief had been replaced by something softer, more peaceful. It was a quiet born not of absence, but of understanding. Kenjiro's visits to his mother's room were no longer a duty, a box to be checked on his daily list of responsibilities. They became a pilgrimage. He would simply sit with her, sometimes in silence, sometimes listening to the tinny, hopeful melody of the mended music box. He learned the language of presence, the communication that exists beyond words. Then, one afternoon, as he was recounting a childhood memory of his father, a small miracle occurred. From the bed, a voice, raspy and fragile from a year of disuse, whispered a single word. Kenjiro, it was his name. It was everything. He felt the foundations of his world shift, stabilizing into something new, something stronger. Later that week, he found Aisha in the garden, tending to the camellia bushes. He approached her, not as a master to a servant, but as a man indebted. He held out an envelope thick with cash. "This is for you," he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "For everything." Aisha looked from the envelope to his eyes. She offered a small, sad smile and gently shook her head. "Some things aren't for sale." Ishikawa-sama, the quiet refusal was not an insult. It was the final, most important lesson. He had spent his life believing everything had a price, that every person had a leverage point. She had shown him a different truth. As he withdrew his hand, he noticed the faint, silvery scar on her wrist, a mark he had seen but never truly registered. He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, and he understood. She was a healer because she, too, had needed to heal. She was a survivor, just like his mother, just like him. And in that shared, unspoken knowledge, a bond was forged, stronger than any business deal or blood oath. Months drifted by, and the seasons began to turn. The sterile, intimidating mansion slowly, imperceptibly, began to feel like a home. Laughter, a sound that had been extinct within these walls, was occasionally heard, soft at first, like the flutter of a bird's wings, then growing more confident. Hannah was no longer confined to her bed. Though still frail, she now spent her days in a wheelchair, often positioned by the large window overlooking the garden, a warm blanket across her lap. Aisha remained, her role having seamlessly evolved from maid to companion, to caregiver, to an irreplaceable part of their small, unconventional family. Her light blue dress was a constant, cheerful presence against the dark, heavy wood of the mansion. Kenjiro was a changed man. The brutal hardness in his eyes had not vanished. The world he commanded would not permit such a thing, but it was now tempered by a new depth, a flicker of warmth and vulnerability. He still ruled his empire with an iron fist, but he now understood that true strength was not about control, but connection. His most important meetings were no longer with his lieutenants, but with the two women in the garden. The story, our story today, ends on a perfect autumn afternoon. The sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the maple leaves in the garden are a riot of crimson and gold. Aisha is humming a soft tune, the same one she sang in the darkness of a safe room, as she pushes Hannah's wheelchair along the stone path. Kenjiro emerges from the house, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. He walks over to them, the crunch of leaves under his expensive shoes the only sound. He doesn't speak. He simply places a hand on his mother's shoulder. She looks up at him, a genuine, gentle smile gracing her lips, and reaches up, covering his strong, calloused hand with her own, her touch delicate but firm. A silent circle of forgiveness, of healing, of love. A new beginning, forged in the quietest corners of the human heart. If this story touched you, if you believe in the power of a simple song to heal a broken world, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the incredible strength found in kindness.